Wolfenstein 3D is the granddaddy of all FPS games. I really feel it's safe to say that we wouldn't have Call of Duty sucking the creativity out of our society if not for the Nazi-killing good times that are contained within Wolfenstein. And the people behind this legendary game were equally incredible. John Carmack and John Romero are infamous for not only reinventing the first-person shooter, but going on to push the limits with Doom, a game so popular it's been ported to literally every console under the sun. I really think the success of Doom demonstrates how talented the original team at id Software really were. Doom is an objectively better game in almost every single way, despite the fact that it was released a little over a year and a half after Wolfenstein's initial release. We get a Call of Duty game every year, with each developer getting 3 years to develop the new title. How similar are those games? How many improvements do you see from title to title? It takes a team with true talent like Sledgehammer Games to even put half a dent in the mechanics of the Call of Duty series. And even when they do, every other team just rushes to copy and paste it into their game. This is one team reinventing the modern first-person shooter, then turning around and reinventing it again. There is a giant legacy behind the name Wolfenstein. id Software never came back to the franchise. Instead, the series would lie dormant for 9 years, coming back with a new Return to Castle Wolfenstein that had nothing to do with the dumb top-down game from the earlier part of the series. Return to Castle Wolfenstein is a game I like, despite the fact that it isn't very good. I think the supernatural enemy designs are good, even bordering on great in some places, but your human enemies are generic fodder, and they don't do the game any favors. Shooting enemies doesn't feel good, and the knife you start every level with has absolutely no weight. And while editing this, I actually found out it won Game of the Year at some publication that makes me sad inside. In 2003, we got Wolfenstein: Enemy Territory, developed by Splash Damage. Splash Damage famously went on to create Brink, a dumpster full of dead gerbils somebody peed on, then set on fire. Despite the fact that the team behind the legendary multiplayer mode of Batman Arkham Origins was the sole developer of Enemy Territory, it turned out to be a good time. So good a time, in fact, that its multiplayer gathered a significant cult following. It was originally released as a multiplayer add-on to Return, but I think it's worth mentioning because people play it to this day. Next, we have a game from the fantastic Raven Software, simply called Wolfenstein. I don't really have much to say about it. I like Raven Software, but boy can they make a generic FPS. After Generstein, the series died again, this time for 5 years. Except it didn't. Very soon after Raven's Wolfenstein, id Software would be purchased by ZeniMax. A good move? A bad move? All I can say is that it was definitely a move. After the acquisition, id gave the rights to the Wolfenstein franchise to Machine Games, made up of developers from Starbreeze Studios, known for games like The Chronicles of Riddick Escape from Butcher Bay in 2004, and The Darkness in 2007. Their Wolfenstein would be their debut game as a developer. In 2013, the first trailer for Wolfenstein The New Order was released. It showed off 2 features that would end up being the driving force behind the title. The first being the high-tech enemies and developments that would drive the story and setting of the game. Most of the trailer was this dark construction footage of the Nazi mechs that are seen throughout the game, with narration over said footage. This narration would be the second part of the trailer that really informs about the game. So, we boot up the game, see the logo that gives me hope for the future, and cue some butt rock. My first big praise about the game comes from an unexpected place for me. BJ Blazkowicz, usually portrayed as anything that made sure nobody had to write an interesting character, is now this southern hero that spouts one-liners about the injustices of the world almost non-stop.
To commission a portrait in service of your ego, Jen, you waste your paint.
They made him an actual person in this game. And as it goes on and his relationships with the people around him change, you actually start caring about what happens to this guy. They went out of their way to make you really feel this guy's internal struggle, and did it by externalizing it. The characters around him are so interesting as well. If BJ is the soul of the story, the characters he interacts with are the heart. In the first level, which by the way is a futuristic storming of the beach with giant robot dogs as a threatening fence through your first playable minutes, we're introduced to two characters that actually shape not only this game's narrative, but go on to shape the narrative of not only its sequel, but presumably the third and final game these people are going to make for the series. First up is Fergus Reid, a Scottish pilot whose dialogue does quite a bit to keep you laughing when he's on screen.
You're still breathing, you chummy bastard. It's tough as they come, you know. Jesus Christ.
His mid-battle dialogue is so casual, it feels as if he's never not been at war. He spews profanities at nobody, cursing the name of the people who annoy him the most. Hint, hint, it's Nazis. On the other hand, you have Probst Wyatt III, whose name feels like it was written just for the joke of the clashing amounts of presumption you would have against that name and his kind-hearted nature. He may be named like a dick, but he's a kind-hearted, straight-laced rookie. Every time he performs an action, he's immediately out of breath, gasping out his surprise for the fact that he actually did something.
Thank you, sir. This mission fails, we lose your battalion.
With Fergus screeching out his favorite four-letter words like he's making a list to make a mother blush.
Are you lazy or wee roasters? This is a war, not a fucking Sunday church walk. Come on.
Wyatt goes hard in the exact opposite direction, often to the exact same effect.
You all right there, kid?
Sir, my eyes are watering, and I think I'm gonna be sick. Is this normal?
I can't tell you how many times I had to pause the game for several moments just to giggle at the gosh darn it's and gee willikers coming out of his mouth. And that's amazing. For a game that provides some of the most teeth-grittingly tense moments of this decade so far, it really goes out of its way to give you some stuff to smile about. At the end of the first level, you're given a choice. The villain of the game has captured your squad, and he holds down the two most likable members of it that aren't BJ himself. And you have to choose which of these wonderful characters to kill. I think for a lot of people, this was probably an easy choice. In the first level, the character that really shines is Fergus. He gets plenty of moments to speak, he's leading the group, and just gets to show off his character more in general. So I think most people would pick him on a first playthrough. At least I know I did. Which is fine. Fergus is great, and his later game depression and alcohol-fueled antics are very compelling. But the fact that everybody I know chose Fergus is also a little bit of a shame. Fergus is a cynic. A cynic in a world ruled by Nazis is unfortunately a bit of an obvious choice. He has his moments of joy, usually fueled by the fact that we're going around killing so many Nazis, but in general, he's just an obvious way to write a character in this world. And he fits in with the rest of the supporting cast who are just as miserable as he is. That's why I actually think Wyatt is the more interesting way to go. He's an optimist. And as the game goes on, his optimism is struggling, and he's really just trying to keep the lights on.
Gosh dang perfect.
What do you got there?
Dog tags. Wing Commander Fergus Reid of the Royal Air Force. Took those off of his dead body, wanted to return him to the RAF, but then there was no RAF.
Best damn pilot I ever saw and a hell of a soldier.
I'm not cut out for this, you know?
Cut out for what?
This. Everything. I was 18 years old, and suddenly the war was lost. Everything good in the world died. Somehow I was the one supposed to pick up the pieces and keep the resistance going, take on the whole gosh darn Nazi empire. You think I was ready for that kind of responsibility? My ignorance got so many good people killed. Remember Private Prendergast? You know, that guy, he could survive anything. So tough. Well, I got him killed, sent him out on a mission, and he never came back. I just didn't know any better. Wing Commander Fergus Reid. He would have known what to do. He could have saved so many.
I made the wrong choice.
You made a stupid choice! Yes, you did! You left a boy in charge of a man's work. I should have died on that day, Captain, on that slab, and Fergus Reid should have lived. I'm not a child anymore, Captain. I know when mistakes were made. There. Leave me alone now, you hear?
Just like the great Jerry Maguire before him, he knows that he lives in a cynical world. But that's not going to stop him from keeping his head up and driving himself forward. He faces indomitable odds right beside you, but he still isn't going to drop an F-bomb. Then there's Anya, who is only really important to the story as BJ's love interest. The fact that she's also a codebreaker kinda doesn't make sense. She's a nurse. Why does she know all of the stuff that she knows? Your guess is as good as mine because it's never really explained. She's about as weak a character as this game has. Luckily, it's sort of made up for in the sequel, but for this game, she feels just kinda tacked on for the sake of giving BJ a connection to this world that isn't killing Nazis. If you want a well-written female character, you want Caroline Becker. Caroline is paralyzed from the waist down, yet she continues to lead the resistance. One of my favorite moments is when she explains how she got paralyzed.
How did you survive? I thought you were dead.
Don't remember much. Remember punching Hans Gross in the face. Remember ascending into the sky. For moments there, I thought I was going to heaven. Then falling, then pain. First pain of my life. Felt like my insides were running out through my back. Could barely move. Had to crawl. They found me after 3 days in a ditch. Long months in a Kreisauer hospital bed. They were shoving tubes in me. Infection. These things I don't want to remember.
I'm sorry about your legs.
Don't be. And how to fly.
She shows that the limitations brought on by her new disability don't limit her as an asset to the Resistance or even as a person. She holds on to hope and refuses to let go. And that's why she's a good leader. She pushes forward through what is probably a hopeless fight and keeps her head up. In a lot of ways, her and Wyatt are the only two real optimists in the game. I could talk literally all day about the supporting cast. Klaus, the former Nazi who has a scene where he talks about his Reich tattoos.
First time it happens.
Yeah, perhaps you should consider removing them tattoos.
I will, in time. I was, as you Americans say, all wet when I got them, and I'm sorry to say it was a very proud moment of my life. I want removing them to be an even prouder moment. No more Nazis, no more tattoos.
And on top of that, he's the caretaker of Max Haas. He's a mentally disabled German giant, averse to violence despite the fact that he's actually pretty good at it. The scene where Klaus is killed in a raid and Max goes on a violent rampage is equally heartbreaking and terrifying. Up to this point, you don't really get to see his strength. Then the first time he shows it, it's by crushing the helmet, head, and skull of a Nazi on the front bumper of a car, then turning around and fist-fighting two armed Nazis to the death. There's this English guy whose name I can't remember, but I can't get him out of my head because his entire arc goes from guy who complains about having a sinus infection to guy who just rammed a car full of explosives into a Nazi space museum in a matter of literally 3 minutes.
I've got a sinus infection.
Every character who takes part in the Resistance is colorful and a joy to experience. So if you want to see them go through their arcs, you'll have to go experience it. I may be done talking about the Resistance, but I can't be done talking about characters yet, because it's time for me to talk about the villains. An antagonistic force is arguably the most important part of the game. So how are the New Order's villains? Well, my answer kind of depends on how specific you are. If we're talking main antagonists, then, well, you may be disappointed. General Death's Head is a by-the-numbers Nazi scientist screwball. Outside of his disturbing character design, he's exactly what you'd imagine that character to be. No, seriously, like, exactly. Go ahead and close your eyes and imagine a Nazi scientist. There you go. You just imagine General Death's Head. At least his name is cartoonishly dumb. You want to talk villains? Compelling villains? Villains that make your skin crawl and stomach churn? Then you want to talk about Frau Engel. I'm sure everybody remembers that clip that went around where a Nazi commander questions you with pictures to test how pure you are. And there's a really good reason you would. It's tense, it's well-paced, and the performance from this actress is so inherently compelling, you can't look away. That would be Frau Engel. She's got this weird relationship with a guy half her age, and they're so genuinely happy together. Their dialogue feels like it's mocking your perception of this world. They can't be that happy. Nazis rule the world. They shouldn't be allowed to be that happy, even if they are Nazis. Every second she's on screen is horrifyingly entertaining. The weird thing is that a lot of the complaints I have about Death's Head actually also apply to her. But the writing is so much more compelling, you just don't care. Even the way these two leave the story feels like one was favored in writing. Death's Head dies when you kill him. Duh, right? That's how bosses in video games work. How does Frau Engel leave the story? After she finds you trying to steal a battery for this Jewish guy who's a part of this ancient magic science cult, she orders the entire block of the containment camp to be executed, and oh no, you're in that block. Then, for some reason, she doesn't take the battery that you obviously have in your hand, so you throw it to Mr. Ancient Jewman, and bing bangity heck, you have taken control of a mech. He orders said mech to kill the execution team, which includes picking Frau Engel up by the face, crushing her jaw into a pulp, and then throwing her into a tree that she bounces off of like a little bouncy ball. And it's so satisfying. She's been this horrible monster in every scene she's shown, and you finally get to give her a taste of her own brutality. Then, right as you're about to escape, she stands in front of your cars with 2 assault rifles and yells at you some more. With her jaw crushed, she now actually looks more like the monster you know she is than a cool German grandma. That entire sequence is way more interesting than anything that Death's Head does. Later on, she shows up again, and you hardcore murder her little creepy boy toy.
Warm blood. The smell.
I give you enough toxins to paralyze the nerve.
There's something very wrong with your cerebral cortex.
I don't think I was the only one excited to see her, because when the sequel came around, everybody squealed with delight to see that she was the main antagonist. So, the characters are good and varying levels of compelling, but this is a game, so how does it play? Well, it feels great. Machine games know how to make shooting guys feel good. And your movement feels so much like Wolfenstein 3D that these silly nightmare Easter egg sections feel a lot less out of place than they look. Melee kills are quick and satisfying, giving you few brief moments of invincibility. Headshots in the optional stealth sections feel excellent, and make these sections a lot less boring than they appear to people watching. And to help with these stealth sections is a lean that can be modified to any height while holding down the shoulder button. The fights with the many mechs featured throughout the game are some of the most fun encounters ever. They're heavily armored, and as you're fighting them, you have to try and sustain fire on the same part of their body to eat through all that armor. Or you can dual wield the automatic shotguns and just take them down with pure DPS. Oh, and you can dual wield, and it feels awesome. No other gaming convention is goofier, so it just makes sense that it's in this game. But there's a problem living in gameplay through 2 design elements. I've mentioned 2 FPS franchises in this video. I said Wolfenstein 3D is the granddaddy of the first-person shooter genre, and The New Order definitely takes after its granddaddy in every way that really counts. If Wolfenstein is the granddaddy of the FPS genre, then Call of Duty is the daddy. And if Call of Duty is the daddy, then unfortunately The New Order has some of its dirty, multi-million-dollar mainstay DNA in it. And this DNA shows up in 2 ways that actually change how levels have to be designed, and therefore how mechanics must be used. So what are they? a sprint button, and an iron sights button. Sprinting means that they need a way to force the player to use it. So, in sections, they pile on the DPS, making your regular moving speed no longer adequate. They also force you to sprint by implementing a slide that must be used to get through certain environments. And outside of these couple of levels where sliding is a requirement, I never used it. And on top of all that, your sprint animation looks dumb as hell. But I can forgive sprinting. The combat in this game is so fun, I totally understand wanting to speed up the process of running from fight to fight. Your base movement speed, which is almost a carbon copy of the speed in Wolfenstein 3D, feels infinitely better to me, but I forgive it nonetheless. I just can't forgive the iron sights. There are so many levels where I was wanting to play it like Wolfenstein 3D, so I wouldn't use iron sights, and it absolutely let me. And those are the best levels in the game. But then you've got levels like this bridge. Not only the most egregious example of being forced to use iron sights, but also the worst level in the game. The level puts every enemy at such a far range that the messy cover system and iron sights are the only way through. The conflicting design of this level make it one of the worst levels in any game that I still really like. And it just doesn't feel as good as the run and gun moments from the other better levels. I hate it more than Blighttown and Dark Souls. I hate it more than the Fontaine fight at the end of BioShock. It's so bad, it deserves its own video. So maybe I'll do that somewhere down the line. The game makes up for it in a big way by giving you a stealth-heavy level on the moon immediately after, which is my favorite level and maybe the goofiest this game ever gets. But this iron sight problem rears its head every time the game wants to show how big things are in it. If we put the enemy super far away, the player will notice how big and cool our level is. These levels sacrifice playability for scale. And what allows them to do that? Iron sights. Hashtag iron sights is cancer, hashtag kill all iron sights forever 2006. Wolfenstein The New Order is not a perfect game. Some of its problems are apparent before the 1 hour mark hits. Others take a while and fester in you for 3 years until you decide you have to make a video that touches on it. But I think that the good outweighs the bad. It's a fun, lighthearted, escapist dream to a world that's dark, edgy, and depressing. It's a game about hope, perseverance, and crushing jaws with Nazi mech suits. It's a game about characters you really care about, really hate, and really laugh with. It's a game that I love. It is, to put it most simply, Wolfenstein The New Order. And if you still aren't convinced, then I'd like to show you one more clip. Spoilers for the end of The New Order.
We are in position. The nuclear cannon is armed. Permission to fire?
A mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning. And her name, Mother of Exiles. Commit, you're tired, you're bored, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me.
Can you hear me, Captain? Am I clear to fire?
You're clear.